and you split it in half, and you run those together at 100 miles an hour, you have the term Melchizedek. The first part, Melech, which means king, and the second half of his name means righteousness. So again, you run them together and you smash them together, you have the name Melchizedek. So literally, as it's recorded for us here in verse 2 of chapter 7, Abraham, he is the first by translation of his name. First of all, we might say, by translation of his name, he is King of Righteousness, because that's what his name means. King of Righteousness. What a pretty cool name to have. King of Righteousness. Now, of course, as we compare that to Jesus, he falls well short of the King of Righteousness, doesn't he? You know, chapter 7, and we'll look at the end of chapter 7 here in just a few moments. But chapter 7 focuses on how Jesus is a better human, better sacrifice, better sacrificer, better priest, better king than Melchizedek ever was. And part of that is that he was more righteous than Melchizedek could ever be. He describes him, let's flip to the latter half of this chapter, the second part of this chapter. At the end, the final thoughts, beginning in verse 26, his righteousness is described like this. For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest, we're talking about Jesus, holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He has no need in verse 27, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he himself did this once for all when he offered up himself. For the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests, but the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. First of all, as a king of righteousness, we see him defined, Jesus defined as sinless. And when we think about a king being righteous or the king of righteousness, maybe that's the first thing that comes to your mind. Verse 26, he is sinless, described in a whole host of ways, but look at it here. Holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners. Sinless. Sinless, 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 right? I mean, this guy that we're talking about, Jesus, was a righteous king because he had no sin. And he continues a little bit into chapter 27. He had no need, like those high priests, first to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins. And we find out other places in Hebrews, he had no sin. Chapter 4. He was perfect. The only one to walk the earth and to hold the title as perfect. He was without sin. Verse 27, as the king of righteousness, he was the epitome of righteous, which is selfless. He was selfless in what he did. There is in verse 27 a reflexive pronoun which brings emphasis back on what he did as we read it. Since he did this once for all when he offered up himself. So again, the emphasis is placed back on Jesus. Jesus was willing to offer up himself. Nobody compelled Jesus, right, to do what he did. Nobody forced Jesus into it or tricked him into it. He saw the band of soldiers coming days before it ever came. Jesus saw the cross. Jesus saw the sin of Jerusalem, and he wept over it. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets. But selflessly, he offered up himself. Jesus is that sacrifice, the sacrifice of himself. He's so selfless, described in verse 27. And in verse 28, I think verse 28, personally, as I read it, I think it's just kind of a summation of verse 26 and 27. He is superior in every way because one of those is he's the son, right? Melchizedek was just a servant of the Most High God. He was a priest of the Most High God, but Jesus here, he is the Son of God that you see at the very end of verse 28. But look at this. This is why he is superior. For the law appoints men in their weakness. And we look at Jesus and we examine him, and do we find a weakness? Do we find a clinch in his armor? For the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests. But the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son. Not just that, a son who has been made perfect forever. Perfect. And then we add on the word forever. Isn't that superior? In every facet of being a king of righteousness, Jesus surpasses Melchizedek. Consider another thought there from verse 2, back in verse 2 of chapter 7. Melchizedek is the king of righteousness because that's what his name means. But he is also the king of Salem because that's where he reigned. Salem. Verse 2. First of all, by translation of his name, king of righteousness, and then he is also king of Salem. That is king of peace. All right? Those of us who don't know Hebrew, right? They make it clear to us. Salem, translated, means peace. Shalom, peace. Peace to you. He is the king, literally, he is the king of peace. What an intriguing idea. Now we see the word Salem in several other places. For instance, Jerusalem, this place of peace. It was supposed to be the place where God lived forever, at least in their minds. Melchizedek was the king of peace. Now that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Isaiah chapter 9, one verse that we're familiar with, and in verse 6, you remember that idea there, that he was this Messiah, in this messianic text. This Messiah was going to be, among many things, mighty God, wonderful counselor, Prince of Peace. Jesus was going to be the Prince of Peace, the Messiah, the Prince of Peace. Later on, still in Isaiah chapter 42, at the beginning of this chapter, and it's re-recorded for us in Matthew chapter 12. Contextually, if you'll allow me, Jesus at this moment is healing multitudes of people. After the rejection and the dissension by people who were supposed to be following him, supposed to be looking for him, Jesus heals people who were willing to follow him, those who were hurting and those who were suffering physically, mentally, emotionally, and we could go on. But in that context, Isaiah chapter 42 is quoted there. And if you look at Matthew chapter 12 and verse 20, I believe, a bruised reed, right? He will not break. The smoldering coal, he ain't going to put it out. He is the Prince of Peace, isn't he? He's the Prince of Peace. And Melchizedek, also the King of Peace. In fact, John records for us in John chapter 16 and verse 33, right before Jesus goes into this high priestly prayer in the upper room. You remember, in the world you will have tribulation, but in me you will have peace. Take heart, I have overcome the world. Maybe the most famous, let's turn over there real quick, the most famous text about Jesus being the embodiment of peace is in Matthew chapter 11, the end here of Matthew 11, where Jesus says, beginning in verse 28, this invitation, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Don't you love that? I mean, don't you love that idea, especially when you're going through difficult times? The idea of being able to come to Jesus. But think about this. As you look at this, Jesus gives three imperatives. Right? If you want rest, if you want peace, there's three things at least that you have to do. And the first one is, come here. All right. Come to me. If you want a relationship with Jesus, first of all, you got to go to Jesus. If you're looking for peace in somewhere else in the world, you're not going to find it. But Jesus offers peace. But the first step in getting to the peace of Jesus, the peace that surpasses understanding, is you got to go. You got to go to Jesus. You're not going to find it anywhere else. So come to me, all right? And we could chew on that phrase for quite some time. The fact that Jesus offers an invitation, the fact that Jesus offers an invitation to come to him, the Creator, the Son of God. We've already sung about it. This is come to me. You can approach Jesus. That's pretty neat. There's a lot of power in that statement. Come to me. Now look at this next thing that you have to do. You got to come to Jesus. And when you come to Jesus, you arrive at Jesus and you got to take his yoke. All right? Take my yoke upon you. Coming to Jesus isn't enough if you want peace. Step one is to get there. Step two is a commitment once you get there. And this commitment that we're talking about is taking the yoke, taking the burden, right? We're talking about working alongside Jesus. That's what the yoke is for. Work with me. Now, a lot of times Jesus pulls most of the weight, doesn't he? And we're just there for the ride. And he describes it this way. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. But that still means that commitment has to be there. You got to put the yoke on. The commitment to follow him. Then, of course, learn from me. You can get there. You can make that commitment. But if you don't learn, what good is it? Have you ever talked to somebody and you're trying to teach them or tell them how to do something and it's in one ear and out the other? And it's like, why am I even talking to you? It's like you sit down there and you try to teach them and you try to be patient. And then at the end of it, you're like, did you not hear a word that I said? We can sit in the pew and we can listen to sermon after sermon after sermon. But if we don't learn, what good is it? Are you not listening? Do you not care? So the invitation, threefold. Come to me. Learn from me. Take my yoke. Isn't it interesting, as a side note here, real quickly? They all got to do with Jesus, don't they? It's all about Jesus. It is not about you. Come to Jesus. He'll take care of you. All right, let's get back to Hebrews 7. So we have this idea that Jesus is by far a superior king of righteousness. He is superior as the king of peace by virtue of what he offers, by virtue of the invitation, who it comes from. And we find here in verse 3 of Hebrews 7 that he is a priest in perpetuity. He continues to be a priest forever. Let's read it. He is without father, Melchizedek. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. So when we go back to Genesis and we look at the life of Melchizedek, this is what happens. We've got the genealogy and the life of Abraham, and we see where he came from. We see all those things. Melchizedek, he just kind of pops into the Bible. We don't know where he comes from. We don't know anything about him. He just kind of shows up, and then he disappears. Here it says he has no father or mother. Well, okay. He's got a mama and he's got a daddy somewhere, but it's not recorded for us. The Bible doesn't tell us about his mother and father as it does with most other Bible characters. He has no genealogy. Well, he came from somewhere, but the genealogy isn't recorded for us. So the analogy is, well, he's a priest forever because he doesn't have a beginning. He doesn't have an end. He's always been. Of course, we know when to draw the line, don't we? We know that. But Jesus has no beginning, truly, has no end, truly, is forever and always. Real quickly, if you turn to the end of Hebrews, this is what we see about Jesus. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 8. Accompanying this promise that he's never going to leave us, he's never going to forsake us. This is what it says in verse 8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, all right? Jesus does not change. Jesus does not waver. He has always been and he always will be. Again, go back to the end of Hebrews chapter 7. Jesus is a priest in perpetuity. Jesus is forever a priest. And look at this. Since he is a perpetual priest, this is what he is capable of doing in verse 25. Consequently, Jesus is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. Jesus, very quickly, does three things for us. He is able to save us. As a priest forever, Jesus has the capability to save us. But look at this definition of how he is able to save us. He is able to save to the uttermost. We might be able to translate that as above and beyond. Jesus isn't barely able to get us through across the finish line by the skin of our teeth. Jesus is able to throw us into salvation, to heave us, to save to the uttermost. Those who draw near, look at it, to God. So what we see is not only is he able to save to the uttermost, Jesus is able to give us access. Access to God Almighty. You can draw near to God through Jesus. And of course, look at this end. Not only can he save you, and not only are you allowed to approach God through him, he's going to beg God on your behalf, intercede for you. Here is God, holy, omniscient. Here is us, way down here, sinful, pitiful, wretched worm of humanity. And what stands in between us is the perfect Son of God. able to intercede for us. He's able to save. He's able to provide access. And He's able to intercede for us. We don't deserve it. But Jesus, just like Melchizedek, right, is the King of peace, the King of righteousness, a priest forever, able to save, intercede, and grant us access to God. The only difference is Melchizedek was a man, and Jesus is the Son of Man, the Son of God. Jesus can grant you salvation and forgiveness of your sins. He's far better than Melchizedek in every aspect. And that's what Hebrews chapter 7 is really all about. You can have access to God if you need forgiveness this morning through the King of peace, the King of righteousness, a priest who stands in between you forever. If you need access to God, if you need to come back to Him, whatever the case may be, why don't you come as we stand and as we sing?